What if I told you a high school rebel challenged a top government official to a live guitar duel and ended up questioning everything he believed in? It all started at a peaceful music fundraiser in Austin, Texas. No one expected drama, no one expected sparks, and definitely no one expected Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, to walk up on stage and go head-to-head with a teenage guitarist determined to prove that speed, volume, and rebellion were all that mattered. But what unfolded next? It wasn't just a music battle, it was a moment that stunned the entire crowd and went viral around the world. This isn't just about guitar solos. This is about pride versus heart, arrogance versus experience, noise versus meaning. Stick around because the ending will surprise you, and the lesson might just stay with you forever. Before we dive in, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you love stories that speak to the soul. Let's begin. What if I told you a high school rebel challenged a top government official to a live guitar duel and ended up questioning everything he believed in? It all started at a peaceful music fundraiser in Austin, Texas. No one expected drama, no one expected sparks, and definitely no one expected Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, to walk up on stage and go head-to-head with a teenage guitarist determined to prove that speed, volume, and rebellion were all that mattered. But what unfolded next? It wasn't just a music battle, it was a moment that stunned the entire crowd and went viral around the world. This isn't just about guitar solos. This is about pride versus heart, arrogance versus experience, noise versus meaning. Stick around, because the ending will surprise you, and the lesson might just stay with you forever. Before we dive in, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you love stories that speak to the soul. Let's begin. The sun was beginning to dip behind the hills of Austin, casting long golden rays across the open field of Zilker Park. Laughter, music, and the aroma of food trucks lingered in the warm air as families, teenagers, and elderly couples gathered for the annual Community Arts Festival, an event meant to raise funds for local youth music programs. On a modest stage set under a large banner that read, "Music for the Future," a teen with wild energy and something to prove stepped into the spotlight. Brandon Miller, 17, cocky, sharp-jawed, and draped in a black Resist t-shirt, slung an electric guitar over his shoulder like a sword. His friends hollered from the front row, "Let's go, Brandon! Show him how freedom really sounds!" Without a word, Brandon plugged in, flipped the amp switch, and unleashed a torrent of blistering notes. The first riff was fast, too fast. His fingers flew across the fretboard like sparks off a grinder, tapping, sweeping, bending. The crowd of teens nearby erupted in cheers. One girl, filming with her phone, whispered to her friend, "He's insane! Like a young Slash on energy drinks." Brandon grinned mid-solo, sweat already starting to gather at his temples. "This is what real music sounds like," he shouted over the speakers. "Not that old-school conservative garbage they play on Fox News." A few adults in the crowd exchanged uncomfortable glances. One older man, Mr. Thompson, folded his arms and muttered, "Fast doesn't mean good." His wife, Mrs. Henderson, nodded. "It's like watching someone scream instead of sing." But the teens didn't care. Brandon was their rebel, their voice. Then something shifted. The back gate creaked open, and a wave of murmurs swept through the park. A slender woman in fitted jeans, a rolled-up white shirt, and leather shoes walked calmly into view. Karoline Leavitt. The White House press secretary, flanked by no entourage, no fanfare, just a quiet presence that carried weight. Phones went up immediately. Parents pointed her out to their kids. A group of young volunteers waved excitedly. Brandon, mid-riff, caught sight of her and scoffed. He leaned toward his friends. "Is that the MAGA lady? What's she doing here? Reading headlines or playing?" The crowd parted as Karoline approached the table of instruments being auctioned. She picked up a sleek black Fender Stratocaster, running her fingers across the polished wood like she was reconnecting with an old friend. An organizer offered her a smile. "Give it a go, Karoline. Show us what you got." Brandon stepped forward on stage, amp still buzzing. "Hey, Leavitt," he called. loud enough for half of Austin to hear. Think you can actually play that thing? Or are you just here to preach? People turned. Whispers turned into excited chatter. A few kids began filming. Brandon's friends chuckled. Ooh, here we go. Karoline looked up, eyes sharp but calm. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just smiled. She lifted the fender, plugged into a small amp beside the table, and strummed a single chord. Clean, warm, confident. The tone rang out across the park like a bell. Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow. Well, I'll be, Brandon sneered. Nice. Got any country songs to go with that Republican smile? Karoline's reply was simple. I don't play music for politics, she said evenly. But if you're offering a challenge, Brandon. She paused, slung the guitar strap over her shoulder, and stepped up onto the stage. I'm in. Gasps and cheers collided in the crowd. A teen girl in a denim vest shouted, Let's go! Battle of the century! Brandon laughed, stepping to the side of the stage to make room. You're on, but don't blink, Leavitt. You might miss what real freedom sounds like. Karoline raised an eyebrow, amused. You can keep the slogans. I'll bring the soul. The crowd exploded. Brandon turned to his crew. Get ready to record this. I'm about to destroy a press secretary. Phones were held high. Flashes blinked like fireflies. The energy shifted, tense, electric. This wasn't just a casual show anymore. This was a duel. Brandon took position center stage, narrowed his eyes at Karoline, then lifted his guitar. This is for everyone who's tired of boring politics ruining everything cool, he shouted. Then he attacked the strings. A flurry of tapping, hammer-ons, pull-offs, and sweep-picking followed. It was aggressive, chaotic brilliance. His body moved with every beat, head thrashing like a rock god at a stadium concert. The younger crowd ate it up, but in the middle of his solo, just a split second, a note missed. A buzz. He recovered fast, but a few adults noticed. Mrs. Henderson whispered, He's slipping. Brandon didn't hear her. He was lost in his own storm of sound. He bent the strings higher, let out a whammy scream that echoed like sirens. He ended with a final power chord, then stepped back, chest heaving, eyes wild. Top that, Madame Maga. Karoline didn't say a word. She just smiled, calm, focused, fearless. She adjusted the amp's volume, then struck a note so deep and rich it seemed to silence the world for a moment. The first riff she played wasn't frantic. It was soulful, echoing the heart of classic rock, bold and emotional. It rolled out like thunder before a storm, drawing nods from the crowd, young and old alike. A young boy whispered to his dad, It sounds like a movie. Karoline flowed into a solo. Her fingers didn't blur. They danced, crafting every note with purpose. The guitar didn't scream. It spoke. She closed her eyes for a beat, letting the sound guide her. Her hands told a story. And in that moment, the audience wasn't just listening. They were feeling. Mr. Thompson blinked back something that might have been a tear. That's music, he whispered. Brandon stood frozen, mouth half open. He wasn't smirking anymore. Karoline ended her solo with a long, low note, then gently muted the strings. The crowd was silent. And then, a wave of applause crashed across the park. Cheering, whistling, shouts of, Karoline! Karoline! Brandon's fingers twitched on his guitar neck. Karoline turned to him, her voice low but firm. Music doesn't need politics, Brandon. It needs heart. The screen of Brandon's confidence began to crack. She stepped back. Your move. And suddenly all eyes were on Brandon. Again. But this time, the energy had shifted. He could feel it. Not just in the stares, but in the silence between claps. The weight of expectation, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of doubt. To be continued, now it's your turn. Who do you think truly won the first round? Brandon with speed or Karoline with soul? Have you ever underestimated someone and been completely shocked by their hidden talent? If you were on that stage, what song would you play to win the crowd? Do you think music should stay out of politics, or is it the perfect way to speak up? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it. The crowd at Zilker Park was electric. Parents shifted forward in their picnic chairs. Teens stood on tiptoes and kids climbed onto their parents' shoulders just to catch a better glimpse. Phones hovered in the air, recording every second. No one expected this. What started as a lighthearted fundraiser had turned into a full-blown, emotionally charged guitar duel between a high school rebel and one of the most recognizable women in American politics. And after Karoline Leavitt's haunting, soulful performance, the air buzzed with anticipation. Brandon Miller adjusted the strap of his guitar, his jaw tight. Moments ago, he was the star of the show. Now he was something else entirely, a challenger who had just been emotionally outplayed. He forced a smirk, but his eyes gave him away. "Not bad," Brandon muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Guess the press secretary's got a few tricks." Karoline didn't respond. She just stepped back, hands calmly resting on the neck of her fender, her face unreadable. She wasn't here to win a crowd. She was here to play music. Brandon took a deep breath and flipped his amp back on. A deep hum filled the space. He looked at Karoline, then at the crowd. "You want more?" he shouted. There were cheers, but they weren't as thunderous as before. Some clapped politely. Others just waited. He struck the first note and dived into another storm of speed. Hammer-ons, pull-offs, two-hand tapping, the kind of technical wizardry you'd see in a stadium metal concert. Brandon was going all in, pushing his limits. The notes blurred into one another, his fingers moving faster than ever. But speed can betray you when it becomes desperation. A note slipped, then another, barely noticeable to the untrained ear. But in this setting, where every eye and ear was locked in, it stood out like static on a vinyl record. Brandon clenched his jaw, tried to power through. He threw in a whammy dive, his guitar screaming, almost shrieking, but something had shifted. The noise no longer felt triumphant. It felt off, like a cover band trying too hard to sound like the real thing. In the front row, Mr. Thompson leaned toward his wife. "He's not playing anymore. He's just throwing punches." She nodded. "And missing." Brandon glanced at Karoline mid-solo, trying to catch her reaction. But she stood still, unmoved. She didn't gloat. She didn't mock. She just waited, calm and silent as a statue, her fingers gently brushing the strings of her unplugged guitar. That calmness rattled him more than any insult ever could. His hands began to tremble slightly, sweat soaking through his "Resist" t-shirt. He pushed harder, bending notes until they squealed, chasing volume, chasing impact. He ripped through a final run of sweep, picking, and ended with a whammy scream that felt more like a siren than a song. Silence followed, a few hesitant claps. Some teens still whooped, but the magic was gone. Brandon stepped back, breathing heavily. He looked out at the crowd and shouted, "Let's see if she can top that." But this time no one laughed. No one echoed him. Even his friends were quiet, eyes darting toward Karoline. She didn't rush. She didn't even speak. She simply stepped forward and turned her amp back on. A low hum vibrated through the stage, and then a single note, deep and resonant, rolled out across the park. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It spoke. Karoline began slowly, drawing the crowd in like a story whispered at the edge of a campfire. Her fingers moved with precision, purpose, and passion, not just playing notes, but telling a tale. The opening riff was raw, alive. Think Back in Black, but with something more intimate. Her solo soared, not with chaos, but with control. Every bend of a string was like an exhale after a hard day. Every vibrato echoed something deeper. The crowd leaned in, pulled into the emotion. She played like she was releasing something heavy. Her left hand twisted slow bends that cried out like longing, and her right hand picked like it was speaking truths she'd never say at a press briefing. One teenager whispered, "She's not even trying to win. She's just playing her heart out." A few rows behind, a father held his young daughter and murmured, "That's what music should feel like." The climax of Karoline's performance wasn't loud. It wasn't fast, it was honest. She ended with a graceful slide into a warm, low note and let it hang in the air, untouched, unmuddied. Then she muted the strings softly as if closing a chapter. The silence that followed was powerful. And then the crowd erupted. Thunderous applause, shouts, whistles. A standing ovation rippled through the park. Even those who didn't care for her politics couldn't deny what they had just witnessed. Brandon froze. His hands dropped to his sides. He'd lost. But not in the way he thought he might. Not by score, not by cheers. He'd lost because she redefined the rules. Karoline turned to face him. Her voice was low, but it carried. "You can play fast, Brandon, but do you ever listen to what you're playing?" The question struck like lightning. Brandon opened his mouth but said nothing. Karoline took a step closer, not to gloat, but to offer something real. "I don't play guitar to impress. I play to feel. After long days, after the press attacks, after tucking my son into bed, I pick this up and I remember who I am." The crowd was silent again, not out of shock, but out of respect. Brandon looked at his guitar, and for the first time that evening, his expression softened, his fists unclenched. He didn't have a comeback, no snarky one-liner, no rebellious shout, just silence, and maybe growth. Karoline looked at him once more. "You've got talent, but if you're only playing to prove something, you'll never find the music that matters." And with that, she stepped back. Brandon stared at his guitar, then at the crowd, then back at Karoline. His face wasn't defiant anymore. It was searching. He took a breath. "Can I try again?" It wasn't loud. It wasn't smug, just genuine. Karoline smiled. Not big, not proud, just enough. "Then play." Brandon nodded slowly, lifted his guitar, and didn't crank the distortion this time. He played a few slow notes, simple, unhurried, and for the first time that day, the sound didn't scream. It spoke. To be continued. Do you think Brandon is finally starting to understand what music is really about? Or do you think he's still trying to prove himself? Let us know what you think. The last golden streaks of sunlight had faded behind the Austin skyline. Soft lamps strung across Zilker Park flickered on, bathing the crowd in a warm amber glow. The once casual community fundraiser now felt like a momentous night, a night no one had seen coming. On stage, Brandon Miller stood motionless, his guitar slung over his shoulder, the amp humming gently. The boy who had stepped into the spotlight earlier, with fire in his veins and arrogance in his eyes, now looked different. He plucked a note. Not fast, not flashy, just one single note. It rang out slow and true, echoing across the field like a whisper finally spoken aloud. Then another. He wasn't shredding. He wasn't showboating. He was listening to the sound, to the space between notes, and maybe, for the first time, to himself. The crowd was completely still. Brandon closed his eyes and bent a string carefully, letting the sound linger in the air. His fingers moved with restraint, like he wasn't chasing attention anymore, but something more elusive, meaning. Behind him, Karoline Leavitt watched quietly, arms folded. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her presence said enough. "You're learning now." The audience was leaning in, not out of curiosity, but out of respect. They weren't cheering yet, because they weren't sure what they were witnessing, but it was real. Brandon continued. No solos, no tapping, just a slow, melancholic melody with emotion dripping from every note. It wasn't perfect. A few buzzes, a slip here and there, but it was raw, and it was honest. A little girl whispered to her dad, "It sounds like he's sad." He probably is," the dad replied, "but that's why it's good." The final note hovered in the air, trembled slightly, and then fell away into silence. Brandon didn't move. He didn't look up right away. And then, a single clap, then another, and another. Soon the entire park roared with applause, but it was a different kind of cheering this time. Not wild, not explosive. It was warm, understanding. Like the crowd wasn't just applauding a song, but a moment. Brandon finally opened his eyes. His face was flushed. He looked out at the people clapping for him, not because he was fast or loud, but because he'd finally shown them his heart. He stepped back from the mic, unplugged his guitar, and turned toward Karoline. Their eyes met. He swallowed hard, took a breath, and said, "Thank you." Karoline nodded, walked toward him, and extended her hand. He took it. The crowd erupted again. Cheers, whistles, even a few standing ovations from the older folks. No one remembered this as a battle anymore. It had become a transformation. Brandon leaned into the mic one last time. I came up here trying to prove a point. Thought playing faster, louder, crazier made me better. But I was wrong. He glanced back at Karoline. She didn't try to beat me. She didn't even argue. She just played and made me feel something. And for the first time, I wanted that more than winning. A few in the crowd wiped tears from their cheeks. He continued, voice steady now. Politics didn't change me tonight. Music did. And maybe, just maybe, we should all stop yelling long enough to listen once in a while. Karoline stepped forward to the mic beside him, smiling softly. Now that was real freedom. As the two stood together on stage, the lights dimmed slightly, and an organizer stepped up, his voice booming through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, this wasn't just a guitar duel. This was what music was meant to be. Connection, honesty, and growth. Let's hear it for Karoline Leavitt and Brandon Miller. The final applause was thunderous. Off stage, Brandon's friends waited, quiet, not with pity, but with new respect. He approached them. The long-haired kid who'd once shouted "Crusher" just nodded and said, "You were better the second time, man." Brandon didn't respond. He didn't need to. The music had already spoken for him. That night, clips of the battle flooded social media. One side-by-side video showed Brandon's first set, blistering speed, chaotic energy, next to his second, soulful performance. The caption read, "When ego steps aside, the music comes through." Another showed Karoline's face as Brandon played his final note. Calm, proud, the kind of expression you give someone when you know they finally see it. Within 24 hours, hashtags trended across platforms. Chakran hard over hype, Chakran Karoline vs Brandon, Chakran play from the soul news outlets picked it up. Opinion pieces came out about the night music beat politics, about how art has a way of cutting through the noise in a world full of division. But for Brandon, none of that mattered. He sat on the edge of his bed the next morning, guitar resting across his lap. No amps, no stage, just him. He played softly, a slow arpeggio, then paused. He thought of what Karoline said. You've got talent, but if you only play to prove something, you'll never find the music that matters. He took a deep breath. Then from memory, he began playing Stairway to Heaven. Not to impress, not to conquer, just to feel. Every note mattered. And for the first time, Brandon smiled. Not the smirk he once wore on stage, but a quiet, content smile of someone who had found a better path forward. A path not driven by applause, but by meaning, because in the end, the real duel wasn't between two guitars. It was between pride and heart won. Now, we want to hear from you. What did you feel watching this story unfold? Did Brandon's change surprise you? Comment 3 if you loved the story and felt moved, 2 if it was okay, or 1 if it didn't hit you the way you expected. And tell us, what country are you watching from? We love hearing where our audience is around the world. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that growth begins when the ego steps aside. And remember, sometimes the quietest note says the most.